My son, it is forbidden for you to interfere in human history.
One thing I do know, son, and that is you are here for a reason.
Those things I can do, all those powers, and I couldn't even save him.
Forbidden. It is forbidden. It is forbidden for you to interfere with human history. It is forbidden. It is forbidden. It is forbidden. It is forbidden.
Come on, come on.
Hi. I've had this picture in my mind about what time actually is for some time now. And I wanted to just sort of put it down just to get it out of my head. You know, this may not be the most groundbreaking thing, but I think it's interesting, so here it is. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen the 1978 Superman film. Some of you may not. But that scene you just saw there is very compelling and quite entertaining. But obviously, it's not very realistic at all because it sort of treats time as if it's, this piece of film that can be rewound by, just switching the direction of the Earth as if it's some giant cassette deck. If you think of these cassettes that we used to use, they're not used as much anymore, but there's recorded music on this film here, and it's all analog. And the head from your cassette player pushes up and reads it, and as it glides along, you hear the music. And it's all physical. And, what Superman's basically doing is, jumping back to this point here so that he can, go in there and prevent Lois Lane from having an accident and save her, right? But time doesn't work that way, at least if we're going to take it in its literal sense. So what is time? Well, if I say, I'll meet you at noon or at midday or high noon, what do I really mean? Well, I mean that the sun is going to be high in the sky. It's going to be 90 degrees. It'll be the middle of the day, 12 noon, midday. And if we look at a 12-hour clock, we can see that the circle, possibly represents the Earth. But we need to look at a 24-hour clock or military time to really see the pictorial correctness here. Because now we can see, look, the top half is day. Sun rising at 6 a.m. or 600 hours. Midday, 1200 hours. And then setting at 6 p.m., 1800 hours. And then at 0000 hours, we'd have midnight. And then it starts over. So this works pretty well, except that the sun doesn't always rise exactly at 6 a.m. and it doesn't always set exactly at 6 p.m., especially considering where you live. If you're on the North Pole or the South Pole, you may have sunlight or night for 24 hours straight. So these numbers are really just a representation of the sun's movements. They're not totally exact. They're, you could say, inspired by. But we can find a more exact rise and setting of the sun if we step back and we look at the ecliptic path that the sun takes. And if you're not familiar with the sun's ecliptic, basically this line shows you where the sun is positioned in relation to the equator at a given point in time. So if we're talking about, the spring equinox, the sun is rising. So if we pick this point here, the sun is rotating like this, right there. And if we pick this point, now the sun's rotating up here. And we go to the highest point, we call this the Tropic of Cancer. And you look at the zodiac, and there's Cancer right there. You see, we're in the sign of Cancer now. And look how close the sun now is to California and getting closer to North America and further away from South America here. And then we move on later in the year, and then in autumn, and then into winter down here, the Tropic of Capricorn. And you can see here, this is the winter solstice, December 21st, and there's Capricorn. So the ancients figured out that every 365 rotations, the sun does this. It rises up here, and then it goes down here. And this is more exact if we want to talk about the rising and then the setting of the sun, you see? And it's interesting to note that a circle is 360 degrees, and the days that it takes for this pattern to repeat is pretty close to that, 365. Now, there's a very practical reason for the ancients to have been interested in this information, because being able to predict the sun's movements was and is directly related to crop yield and survival in general. Understanding the sun's cycles let farmers know when the best time was to plant and when to expect harvest. Allocating animals and personalities to 12 phases, each 30 degrees, of the sun's position in the ecliptic seems like an engaging way to join one's conscious mind and very being to the changing of the seasons. Kind of like the way myths and tales are passed down, but which contain useful, perhaps even vital knowledge for future generations. So, since time isn't really a thing that we can touch or feel, or even a force, it's just merely telling you where the sun is at a given moment, how is time travel possible? I mean, that's like saying, I can travel through pi, or I can travel through Einstein's theory of relativity. You can't travel through a number system. So what do they really mean? What do science fiction writers really mean when they say time travel? What did Einstein mean when he said time travel? In the TV series Outlander, the main character travels to different times in history by touching magic stones, somewhat similar to those found at Stonehenge. I suppose if one had the powers of God, the world could be instantly recreated in every exact way to a previous moment in history. But nothing short of godlike powers could accomplish this. One would have to perfectly replicate the entirety of reality down to the cellular level. Let me illustrate what I mean in a simpler way. Imagine a room which represents the entire world we live in. In this room, a glass of water is being filled slowly, starting at 6 a.m. on a given date. Let this glass being filled represent everything and every activity occurring on Earth during that period. Once the cup is full, it represents everything and every activity happening on the planet Earth at midnight on that particular day and year. It is a living snapshot of that moment. Now, since we've reduced reality down to such a simple level, we can now imagine ourselves pouring the water out and sitting the glass down exactly in the same spot. And I mean exactly. So if you took a microscope and looked right in on where that glass is sitting, it would be in exactly the same spot as it was before. So we've just traveled back to 6 a.m. In other words, if I had godlike powers and I could revert everything you see back to the exact state it was 100 years ago on a specific date, what would be the difference between your conception of time travel and your experience at that moment? None. There wouldn't be a difference. So that's what time travel is. It's going to a different arrangement and positioning of matter, a very specific one that would be impossible to replicate and arrange unless you had the intelligence and superpowers of God. Time is a promise, delivered with stunning consistency. Queensryche from the song The Whisper. We take for granted that our mathematical formulas are based upon the movements of the celestial objects, not the other way around. If they decide to behave differently and break the rules or whatever, then our formulas will no longer work. They work because we rely upon those planets doing the exact same thing all the time. Time is a promise, delivered with stunning consistency. Now, Einstein's idea was that theoretically, the closer we come to traveling at the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second, the more time would appear to slow down for us from the perspective of someone who, in relation to us, was not moving. He called the slowing of time due to motion time dilation. I think the story I heard was that Einstein was in a train or a bus and he was traveling away from a clock tower. And while he was looking at the clock tower, he imagined in his mind, what if we could move as fast as the speed of light, as fast as the light from that clock tower was hitting my eyes? Well, then time would appear to sit still, wouldn't it? The hands would stop moving. And if we take another leap forward and imagine ourselves moving faster than the speed of light, well, then could we jump to a position that already occurred? Could we see the clock as it appeared 5 minutes ago, 5 hours ago, 5 years ago? In the film Maverick, Tom Cruise's character attempts to go Mach 10, nearly annihilating his plane in the process. According to Google, that's about 7,672.69 miles per hour. So even in a film where it's very unrealistic, his ship's about to fall apart, okay? So the idea that one might be able to travel 186,000 miles per second becomes pretty absurd when we just consider the sheer physical impossibility of it. So we've basically hit the same brick wall. Yeah, maybe there is a speed which is faster than perceived time, but achieving that level of acceleration would again require godlike powers. Perhaps we should just accept the advice of Superman's father, Jor-El, and not attempt to interfere with our own history. Maybe we just aren't the supermen we like to imagine ourselves being. Maybe time travel falls into similar territory as DNA manipulation, or mankind's quest to give birth to AI. There could be a fine line between innovation which benefits humanity and simple hubris. We'd be wise to perceive the difference.